Welcome to Dedicated with Doug Brunt. You have just gained access to an exclusive insider's look at the lives and works of some of your favorite authors, and hear conversations with the world's greatest writers as they discuss their writing lifestyle, creative process, latest work, and behind-the-scenes revelations.
Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today we're talking to David Duchovny. He is an English literature PhD candidate at Yale, and in one of the greatest sliding door stories of all time, he paused his PhD work. He did not become Dr. Duchovny, and probably the most handsome English professor in American history. He started doing some theater around Yale, and before too long, he was a household name as an award-winning actor in feature films and hit TV shows like The X-Files and Californication. But the spirit of Dr. Duchovny lives on. He has written for television, including some episodes of The X-Files, and he's also the best-selling author of 6 books, including his latest, Kepler, which we have here, a graphic novel. So much to talk about. David, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for describing me as a PhD candidate in the present tense, because I guess there's always a hope that I will write my dissertation.
I think they can never take it away from you. I want to talk about the dissertation because I think I have the name right. But before we get too deep into that, your cocktail selection for today is the Tequila Greyhound, or the Paloma, as it's also called. Yes. So I'm going to make one.
Okay.
And we're talking here in the morning, but
not too difficult a recipe to follow.
Right. The tequila grapefruit, which has plenty of vitamins for the morning.
Now, the Greyhound, which is made with vodka, has salt on the rim, but I don't recommend that for high blood pressure sufferers out there.
I actually suffer from that, so I will opt out. Well, cheers. Thank you for coming on.
Cheers to you. Is that the San Remo behind you?
Yeah, well spotted. So I also have a copy of The Reservoir here, and which I think that's the San Remo there too, right?
Yeah, you have the reverse view of what mine was when I lived there. Yeah, I lived on the west side, just a few blocks up from the San Remo. Beautiful.
Oh, I love the book, The Reservoir, which is set there, and a lot of it takes place in Central Park. I used to jog around the reservoir when I lived in the city.
Yeah, so did I. And there's some pretty good sized potholes in that reservoir track.
Definitely, yeah. And people going the wrong way. Occasionally, it gets a little bit physical trying to get around.
Is there a right way and a wrong way? I was never quite sure.
I always ran counterclockwise. I thought that was the way to go.
Yes, I think that's the way I ran. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the beginning, because I know you're born in New York and you went to the collegiate school, which, so listeners know, is academically very rigorous, terrific school, and particularly has a reputation for teaching kids how to write well. Some of the other alums there are David Benioff, who was a writer and showrunner for Game of Thrones. JFK Junior, I think, may have overlapped with you there at Collegiate.
Certainly did. Yeah, my first year, John was there, and my family lore, which isn't writ large, but the idea was I tried to get into Collegiate when I was in 2nd grade, going into 3rd grade, and I didn't get in. And my mother always told me that JFK Junior got my spot. So when I did get into the school in high school, I was gunning for JFK there, and I was like gonna tell him that he had taken my spot. But my first day there, I was in the lunchroom and I asked some of my new friends, or guys that I was getting to know, which one is John? And they just schooled me and they said his name is John.
Was he the same year as you?
Yeah.
Same year.
Pretty good friends.
Was he a teammate too? Because I know you were a standout baseball and basketball player there.
He was not a teammate. He was not athletic, and he did leave after my freshman year. But we did a school trip to Washington that year in the fall, and I was just a new student, and they actually roomed me. And we spent one night in a hotel in Washington, and I shared a room with John. I guess they let the new kid be with John. I don't know what it was, but so we got to know each other, and we knew each other for that year. And then I would run into him every now and then, especially at like Knick games in the 90s, and see him.
Yeah. I know you were a key man there, or head boy or something, because you were not only a head boy. That was because you were a stud athlete as well as academically a standout too. We actually have one other collegiate connection which you couldn't possibly know about, but I was a collegiate parent. I didn't go there, but my kids did, and they're so focused on writing there that they do this thing every year called Author Night. And you and I never had a book out in the same year. So we never did it together, but I went every year anyway because my kids were there. And so I was there watching you do the event when your Bucky Dent book was out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you were on stage with a classmate maybe, right?
Was Peter Blauner on stage maybe?
Yeah, he was like your agent maybe, or you guys still have a professional association, I think.
Well, Andrew Blauner is my agent, and Peter Blauner is his brother who was my classmate at Collegiate. Okay. Andrew was a few years younger. And Peter's a terrific novelist and also works writing for television, has worked in like the Dick Wolf universe for quite a bit. And that's the thing about Collegiate. As you said in your introduction, it really, I don't know what your experience was with your child, but looking back on it, it really was a school that was focused on writing. Not to the exclusion of the sciences, for sure, but just in their history and their English classes, we wrote a hell of a lot, and that education for me was invaluable. And
was there a teacher there, like a standout? Sometimes you have that one middle school or high school English teacher that just makes you fall in love with it.
They were all great in different ways. I remember Jim Shields, who was a long time head of the English department there, a wonderful teacher. I've written kind of around a relationship that I had with a Latin teacher there, which was also extremely important for me as a 14 to 18-year-old named James Rogers, who's deceased. But he was wonderfully difficult, wonderfully hard teacher. This from a different age when teachers really challenged you and made you feel uncomfortable. Which I'm being old fashioned in my own way. I feel that part of being educated well is actually being challenged and being made uncomfortable.
I totally, you can't be coddled. And so when our kids come home complaining, I'm like, good, I'm glad I don't want to hear you coming home being coddled in there. That doesn't sound right. That's certainly not what I went through.
Yeah.
So you finished up collegiate as head boy. You go into Princeton, where you continue to play some basketball. You're winning awards for writing poetry. On to Yale for the PhD. And let me see if I have the thesis right. Magic and Technology in Modern Fiction and Poetry.
Well, you have it right, but it doesn't exist. So
it needs yet to be completed.
Yeah.
So is this like Jules Verne type stuff, or is that not yet considered modern?
No, that's too old to be modern. I was thinking it was more like contemporary. I was going to write on James Merrill, who did a lot of like seance-oriented poetry. Robertson Davies, the Canadian author. Ishmael Reed, Mumbo Jumbo specifically. Pynchon, Crying About 49, and Gravity's Rainbow specifically. And Norman Mailer, like Of a Fire on the Moon. And my thesis idea, which I don't know if it would have worked out or not, but it was something that I liked, was, I guess to put it in a nutshell, it would be that there's always been authors interested in magic, and magic has always been something that's discussed, and historically there were fields of magic that were good and bad. You could call them white and black magic or whatever, but there was a moral kind of valence or aspect to magic. Dr. Faustus being an obvious kind of a cautionary tale, that there was magic you should do and magic you shouldn't do, magic you could do and magic you shouldn't do. And that in my discussion, technology was going to be like a modern magic, and clearly is. I mean, we do things that seem magical. We fly through the air. Our lives are littered with us being magical beings with the aid of technology. And yet technology is not necessarily discussed in terms of morality, maybe in terms of pollution, morality, but not in and of itself. And the bare fact
the morality
is
always
that,
lags quite a bit.
yeah, we've never had a weapon that we haven't used, unfortunately. So obviously the morality in the technology of weaponry or just technology itself was absent, and that I was going to address these authors who were bringing a field of morality into technology, which was not something that is part of the actual science of it.
What's remaining on the PhD? You have to go do a sort of an oral defense of your thesis, or you have to write something? You have to write it? You have to do the whole thing? Okay. What are the odds you revisit this and become Dr. Duchovny?
Well, unless like Dr. Faustus, some devil visits me and gives me a freebie and says, here's your dissertation in exchange for your soul or something else, then I'd say the odds are not very good at all.
I mean, it could be like an exchange for your autograph at this point. Maybe they'll just come in and say,
I would do that, although there's always a catch that I'm not seeing. So, and you can tell by the preamble to this conversation, my loathing of technology is strong, and the machines know it. I break everything just by looking at it. So I have a real adversarial relationship with the world we're living in right now.
Well, and it's so nice to be sort of coming through the virus situation where we don't have to get on the Zooms all the time. We can get back in person. There is something kind of old school about getting in a room together that's so nice now.
There are things we don't know that we lose when we're not face to face. I'm sure there will be studies that come out, but I can intuit it, and you can intuit it.
So I asked, in that preamble, I also joked about sliding doors, but I wonder if that really even applies in your situation, because sometimes I wrestle between sliding doors versus inevitable. Like sometimes it's not like turn left instead of right and wind up with this whole new thing. When I feel like there are two groups of actors sometimes when I think about it. On the one hand, there's somebody like Robin Williams, and I bet if you spent 10 minutes in a room with him in the 70s, you think, oh my God, this guy needs a show, and it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then there are other times you watch a movie where you see someone who's like, they're fine, no knock, but if it wasn't this guy, right place, right time, it'd be one of a million other guys. And I think you are more in the inevitable category. What do you think about that?
I mean, I like it. It's flattering. I think, I thought where you were going with that is that, my particular presentation of my personality or of my human energy is not one that people would associate with performance or extreme expressiveness like Robin had, or even just the facility of his comedic mind. So I thought you were going with like, oh well, you don't seem like an actor, which is what I got when I first started out. Aside from them knowing, if they knew my personal history, they might say, why are you doing this? What's the need? It's almost like the question was, there's something missing from actors. There doesn't seem to be something missing from you. Why are you doing this? Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of looking around at you to get ready for this. So I saw your appearances on a few different podcasts and TV shows and things like that. And you're definitely not Robin Williams, but there's a different power to the way you do it. And one of the things I was amazed at and surprised at in watching a bunch of footage of you is how funny you are. And it's because it's so deadpan. It's unbelievable. And then when you land it, there's no window dressing or wind up to it. And then when you land it, it's all the more surprising and powerful because you're like, wait, did he say what? And like, have you ever seen the comedian Stephen Wright?
Yeah, I love Stephen
you're not, he sort of strays into the bizarre. You're not exactly that, but you're that kind of deadpan where it just like totally gets you.
Yeah. He has one of my favorite jokes of all time where he says something like, I have an extensive seashell collection. I keep it on all the beaches of the world.
Yeah, there's another one where he's like, I'm leaning back in the chair. You know that feeling when you're leaning back in the chair and you're just about to fall and you catch yourself and do it? I feel that way all the time.
Yeah.
He's, I haven't seen anything out of that guy in a long time, but I used to love his.
Nor have I. Yeah, well, I think that, I don't know where the deadpan comes from. I really don't know. I mean, I'm a huge Buster Keaton fan, and I just read his biography, and just to think about the origins of that comedic brilliance that he had, and to somehow keep a straight face to all intents and purposes, looking at somebody keeping a straight face, and yet there's some communication of the chaos that's going on around them, and I guess, Keaton for me is the best of the best. And I guess that's kind of, if I'm trying to be funny or I'm existing on film in a funny situation, then I see it as deadpan, but I see also, or I feel also, that I'm communicating something about the chaos around me or about what I deem as funny. And I go back to a story that Shandling told me, Gary Shandling, who's a great friend of mine, and he said he was performing in Vegas, and he knew Don Rickles was in the audience, and that generation of comics was a huge, Rickles was godlike, and he was worried, does Rickles think I'm funny? And then Rickles came backstage, and Gary asked him, as comedians do, how'd I do? Was I funny? And Rickles said, did you feel funny? And that's how I've gone ever since I've heard that story. It was like, oh, I think that's how I'm working. It's like, I'll do a take and it won't be any different from the previous take, but I will have felt funny in it. And maybe that's
some
what
different
Stephen
energy.
Wright means by feeling funny, by that feeling. And
there's something, just whether you're doing comedy or drama, there's something unique about you in the way, like some people are writing screenplays only for Jeff Goldblum or something like that. Cause there's just, you don't look at him and think one of a million guys could also do this. There are probably people writing screenplays like only David Duchovny can play this role. Like there's just something different and unique about you. That, you're certainly getting a lot of work. There must be that happening.
But I mean, when I was starting out as an actor, I certainly, I was rejected from many, many auditions that I did. And I did have a sense in which I was, not that they were going to catch up to me, but that somebody was going to get what I thought I was doing, because I felt funny, and I was like, oh, they're not getting it. But eventually I thought, I had a belief that they would. And that's an amazing thing to me when I think back on it. It's like, why didn't I lose faith? Why didn't I give up? Because I certainly did audition for a lot of things and didn't get it.
What did keep you going? Just an inner belief that I think I will get there? Because that's, getting rejections as an actor, as a writer, all that stuff is so soul crushing.
It is. I don't know. I don't know where the belief came from, but it was just basically that sense of, I'm doing something here, whether or not people are seeing it, eventually they're going to see. And I've also talked about this, and this is true. And when I first started doing the X-Files, there was so much work. It was 14 hours a day, and I was acting 10 months of the year, 14 hours a day for like three years in the beginning. Let's say the first 3 years, and even though I was playing the same character, I taught myself how to act over those 3 years. So, but in the beginning, I was convinced that I was the best actor on the planet, and I certainly was not. When I look at it, not convinced, I don't walk around like that, but like I had that inner belief. And it's funny, you asked me about this, because when I look back on, like, say, a first season episode, I'm like, no, you're not good at all, Dave. And yet I had this belief to kind of carry me over to the point at which I started getting better, and I was actually accessing what I thought I'd been accessing and that I wasn't.
That's funny. There's a different writer coming on the show in a couple of weeks, and so I've been reading his books. And I was like, I just got your debut novel. He goes, oh my God, don't read that. It's the most I'm hugely embarrassed right now. It's the worst published novel ever. But it's funny to go back and read your early writing or your early acting to think. But so, 14 hours a day for 3 years, that's like forced acting boot camp. I mean, of course you can just sort of, there's a certain amount of repetition in almost anything, even if it's artistic, there's a certain amount of repetition that helps.
It was that Gladwell thing. It was that whatever, how many hours it was.
Yeah, the 10,000 hours.
It was a lot of hours. And again, I'm not playing different characters with all those hours, but the X-Files had kind of a flexible tone, so I could kind of push this Mulder character into a comedic episode. I could push him into a soap opera episode. I could push him into horror. I could push him into thriller. And that kind of allowed me to expand and contract a little bit, even though I was playing the same character.
So your first kind of, I don't know if this was even a breakout role, because I guess it was a smaller role, but in '88 you did Working Girl, which was like, the cast on that was insane. It was Harrison Ford and Sigourney Weaver, Melanie Griffith. You were pretty young then. I mean, that was not long after Yale when you did that film. Yeah,
I was probably 27, 28, but I was a glorified extra in that. I was really cast as part of Tess's, Melanie Griffith's Staten Island cohort. And the idea was, the part, as it was sold to me, and they didn't have to sell it to me because I would have taken any job offered me, but as it was sold to me was, you'll get a chance to go in there and improvise. And, Mike Nichols is the director. This is a great opportunity. When in fact, we didn't really do much improvising at all. And I'm basically an extra with really good billing. I think I'm like 6th on the whole movie. And I was like, how the hell did that happen? I'm not doing anything. Yeah. But it was fun to see Mike Nichols' work. It was, enlightening to see what I thought of as like the A level of Hollywood, production. And same thing happened on Chaplin. When I worked on Chaplin a couple of years later. And again, this could be my overconfidence in a way, which I'm touting as something that's necessary when you're starting out. It's objectionable, but it's necessary. When I watched Chaplin and I watched Robert Downey work, and I watched Kevin Kline work and Attenborough, and no slight on them, they're amazing. But I thought, hey, I'm in the right place. I'm not. They're not doing anything that I'm not seeing, that I'm not doing. Like it wasn't. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. I mean, it was way better than I was doing it, but I could see myself like existing in that creative world. So that was important for me as well.
Were you also writing at this time, novels or screenplays?
I was trying to write a screenplay. That's actually what got me out to Hollywood in the first place. Was I met a guy who wanted me to try to write this screenplay. And I came out here and I stayed at his house on PCH and tried to write for a while I was initially auditioning for stuff. So I was trying to, work both sides of the street on that. But then as I got work as an actor, I didn't have the time to write anymore, or the focus that I would need.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into your writing process, which I want to talk to you about, because part of it is like, where are you finding the time? You're jetting around, you're doing Bill Maher and late night shows, and you're in a bunch of TV shows and movies. Where do you find the time now can you write on a plane? Or I picture you kind of like your character in The Reservoir, like in a quiet room, sort of, solo up there and just sort of working away.
That's how I have written. I think when I first started writing fiction or novels, it was probably 2014 or 2015, and my kids were in middle school and early high school, and I was pretty much committed to staying in New York to help raise them, and not being all over the world or across the country. So that limited the amount of jobs I could take. I had Californication, which was great because it was like a 3-month gig, and I could work it during the summers. I could have my kids out there in California. So aside from that, I was looking at 8 or 9 months of the year, and I was wondering, I don't really want to pursue that much acting in those times because I want to be here for the kids. So it was really put up or shut up time as a writer. I was like, well, I have all this time. The kids are off to school at 8, and then they're not back till 4 or 5. So what am I going to do with my days? And I've always considered myself a writer. So let's see if you can do it. And it was actually that spot, looking out at the Reservoir, getting up early and writing for 4 or 5 hours that really started me on that. The process is always, if I have an idea, I'm not writing if I don't have an idea.
So a couple of just quick mechanical questions on process. So you write in the morning, typically, like coffee, and then just always sort of crank it out through the morning?
I can't write at night. I can do very, very little at night. I mean, sometimes I can think at night, but I can't really write at night. Around noon, I start to lose whatever it is I think I'm doing if I get up early. I try to get up before the sun, and have coffee, and then just take that. Again, for me, it's about false confidence. Coffee gives me false mental confidence that
caffeine is a drug. It works.
Absolutely, it's a drug.
So, do you write by hand, or do you key it in right away?
I key it in, which is funny because I'm not a good typist. I'm still a hunt and peck guy. So I'll have the computer, but I'll also have a legal pad and a pen off to the side, so that if I start thinking faster than I can write, I will drop the keyboard and I will just write it out by hand.
That's funny. I'm also a little bit hunt and peck. I can type with these 6 fingers is basically what I do. And I was joking the other day that I'm like, when you talk about a prize fighter who's sort of pound for pound is good. Like finger for finger, I'm pretty quick if you're just doing 6 fingers.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that I would have stared at this keyboard for as long as I have in my life and have no idea the order of the letters that I'm looking at.
All I remember is QWERTY. That's the only thing I've got.
Well, that's your home base, right? Yeah. Type fast. I took speed typing in high school, and there was a moment when I could do it, and then I forgot.
Yeah, the look away thing, I can never look away and just type. That just seems impossible to me.
Franzen wrote the corrections in the dark.
He typed it in the dark? I haven't heard that story.
I remember reading that, and I was like, oh, God, he's so lucky his fingers didn't slip up a line, and he would have just had a nonsense book on it.
Right, it would just been gibberish.
Yeah.
I read where you find you sometimes can surprise yourself with what happens next in the book. So I take it, some writers outline a bunch. Some feel like outlining will take away from the energy of the book. Sounds like you're not an outliner.
No, I am an outliner to an extent. I do like to know where I'm beginning and where I'm ending. I do like to know some signposts along the way for sure. But I'm not a meticulous outliner. And sometimes I get anxious to start writing,
Mm-hmm.
And so then I'll just begin, even if I don't have enough, I think, to go on. And then I will surprise myself. And then the legal pad is there for, because I'll be typing a scene or I'll be typing a section, and I'll have an idea for 3 sections away, and I'll need to write that out. But I like to be surprised because I think at certain points, at least in my experience of writing, the characters take on a life of their own, and the characters start to, if not speak to me, it sounds like I'm a crazy person, but they at least, I will have something outlined for them to do, and they'll start to maybe argue against that and say, I'd rather go here, and then I'll follow them after a certain point. So I don't think if I were to meticulously outline it to really stay in the outline until I had the whole story, I don't think it would be the best story that it could be for the way that I work, because once I get into it, that's when it starts to get more particular.
Yeah. And you're also writing a bunch of music, I think, or at least you have an album out, I think, right? Are you writing the lyrics and the music, or how's that?
Yeah, I have three albums, and I'll be like recording a 4th soon. I have a lot of songs, but mostly it's I'm not a great musician, and I'm still like I started playing guitar maybe 10 years ago, so I'm never going to be any good. But I know chords now. I can play chords, and so I can write rock and roll songs. So I'll write chords and melodies and lyrics, and then I'll bring it to the band, and they'll make it better. And that's been the process before, but now we're more of a band, and now we're kind of writing together, and I'll come in with a seed of a song now, instead of like trying to finish it all by myself. I'll bring it to the band, and we'll complete it together.
That's amazing you did that. I started taking piano lessons not long ago, and it was just so hard. I gave it up. The fact that you stuck with it and you're actually making albums now, it's inspiring me to maybe try that again.
Well, I think guitar's easier, to be mediocre at than piano. I think which is what I'm at. And you just have to get to mediocre to know enough to write rock and roll songs anyway. So that's where I'm firmly there. I'm firmly mediocre, and it's really. I wish that I could play lead. I wish I could finger melodies out, but I can't. So I'm stuck with my chords and whatever's inside my head in terms of melody.
It reminds me a little bit of John McEnroe, not just on the music piece. I know he's also in a band, and I think got more serious about music a little bit later on. But you guys reminded me of each other in a way too, about just being these iconic New Yorkers. Like, there's that famous photo of McEnroe. He's like walking in the city with a trench coat and it's raining and stuff. I think of you two in the same way as this, like, you've got this classic New York vibe. Like, I'm a good guy, but do not F with me. Or it's not going to end well for you. And just have sort of a New Yorker vibe. Do you know McEnroe?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't say we're friends, but I know him to say hello. And in fact, I love tennis, and I play some, not so much recently, but I like playing tennis. And one time, I recall when I was married out here, Tay and I guess we just both had a day off together for some reason, and we decided to smoke a joint and go play tennis. And we went up to we went up high to go play tennis, and we were having fun. And then McEnroe showed up on the court next to me, and I had a complete paranoid meltdown where I was like, "Oh my God, I can't play tennis next to the best player of all time. I can't do it. I can't do it." I was like, "Is he watching me? Is he watching?" I was like, "No, he's not watching you at all."
He's had quite a second career here as the announcer. I love when he's calling it's just such like he's a great. Frankness to the way he does it. It's just great when he calls the matches.
He tells the truth, which is so. It's hard. It's hard for these announcers to tell the truth, and his insights are wonderful. And
he's smart. I wrote a book where the main character was a professional tennis player, so he came up as a prodigy.
Really?
And James Blake helped me a lot with the research. And one of the things he was saying, and I heard you on the Rob Lowe podcast, what made me think of this a little bit. James Blake was saying, so he came from this family that really valued education. And when he was out on tour, the first thing his parents would say to him are, "James, what are you reading?" Or "What's the last thing you read?" And he always had an answer. And he was in like the players' lounge, and some of the other guys of his era were there. And they asked that question, he had an answer, and they're like, "What are you reading?" He's like, "I haven't read a book in like 5 years. The most I read is, People magazine once in a while." Nobody on the tour was reading or focused on education because they all were down at Bollettieri playing tennis 8 hours a day and not doing that kind of thing.
Right. I don't know. It kind of gets. I remember reading this article about A-Rod, about Alex Rodriguez, and it was his sports psychologist. I don't know who the guy was, one of his trainers. And he was saying, the typical person has, and I'm going to make up the numbers, but I'm going to get the ratio of the numbers similar. So the typical person has 20,000 thoughts in a day. Alex has 500. And that's why he's a great hitter. Because, that's.
Don't think, just do.
Exactly. That's not to say that he wasn't taught and he wasn't, he didn't get better, with teaching how to hit. He wasn't just see ball, hit ball, but somehow
he voluntarily put the thoughts out.
He had a quiet mind, or his mind was really just interested in hitting, so that's, I think, we're always asking our athletes to, read books and stuff, but in fact, that might make them worse athletes.
Well, what about acting? Because that was a topic that came up with you and Rob in the podcast that I noticed, and he was like, David Duchovny is by far the smartest, most well-read, guy, and Rob's worked with thousands of actors and over his amazing career. Yeah. He seemed to have a take that most actors are, they can do their lines and they do that stuff, but you're so focused in the way that you are focused as a tennis player or a baseball player on doing this one thing. You don't have a broader knowledge base, whatever it is, broader education, knowledge base. What have you found that in acting that, you're at Yale, for crying out loud, getting a PhD?
Yeah. I think it can be true that too much intellectual pursuit can kind of hamstring you as an actor. And when I started, the second acting teacher that I was kind of in deep with was a Meisner technique guy, which is an interesting technique from Sanford Meisner. And he was always like, your intellect is your enemy up here. This is about reaction. This is about emotional reaction. It's not about thinking. And there's a lot of truth there. Although your thinking can get you to a point of, I need to you understand the emotions of this scene as well, or the structure of the piece, or my place in the piece of this, as an actor. But the actual give and take of being in a scene with somebody, and again, it's like tennis. It's just like hitting a ball back and forth, but you're not. It is a sport in that case. You just got to hit that ball back wherever it's coming at you, and there's no amount of thinking at that point about your stroke and about your the crowd or whatever that's going to help you. It's really just instinctual reaction. So I think there is something to it, and I think that was really one of the reasons I was attracted to acting, was because it was so different from anything I'd done, and very much similar to all the sports I played that I loved that I was no longer playing. So I think this discussion is kind of bringing it clearer and focus to me as to, I don't want to be one of those people, because I don't believe it, to say actors don't read or actors are dumb or whatever. I will say that, being book smart or anything like that is not necessarily an advantage, and you can be layering over, your kind of reactive emotionality with rational book learning or whatever. And that's not necessarily a good thing for your work.
Yeah. I wonder if your comment, a quiet mind, that kind of stuck out. Like if you can get to the place where you're not having those 20,000 thoughts, you got to, dial it back, just get in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, what was funny was, like, obviously when I read the article about A-Rod, if you tell that story, you want to laugh at the story because, A-Rod doesn't have many thoughts, but I'm not saying, I'm actually saying to have a quiet mind and to not have that many thoughts is a wonderful place to be, and not necessarily something that he didn't work on.
Right. Wanted to. I know we don't have unlimited time with you, but so I wanted to talk about Kepler here, which I read and loved. This graphic novel is so cinematic, and it's a fascinating, I guess, sort of allegory, really, for humankind. It's sort of taps into some of your X-Files background too, with sort of the Kepler is a planet system, and I love some of the things in there too, like the cultural appropriation of the Bonobian third eye. I got a chuckle out of that as well. Right. It's really well done, and it sounds like it may have started. There's some thinking that it could be cinematic. There's a sort of a screenplay version of it, maybe.
Well, there's a pilot that I wrote probably 4 or 5 years ago, just out of the blue, because I'd read this book, *Sapiens*, this bestseller.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And in that book, I was reading about all the other hominids that we shared this planet with at some point in history, prehistory, unrecorded history. The Neanderthals especially seem to have been very close to us, because obviously so many Homo sapiens have Neanderthal DNA. So
we're like 3% Neanderthal or something, right?
So we interbred with them, outcompeted them, whatever that means. Like you see the word outcompete. It could also mean genocide, eradication, decimation of an entire group of hominids that's lost in prehistory. And it's not just Neanderthals. It's, we have Denisovans, Floriensius, and we'll probably continue to find evidence of all these other hominids. And I was just struck with the idea of our prehistory, of the violence of it, of the appropriation of it, appropriation of their DNA at the base sense. And I thought, well, on another planet, would other hominids have outcompeted us, or especially if we had meddled in their competition? So I was also always wanted to get back to like this formative movie-going moment that happened to me, probably happened to a lot of people in my generation, when Charlton Heston comes upon the Statue of Liberty on the beach, Planet of the Apes. And, to a 10-year-old or whatever it was when I saw it, it just blew my mind. It's like I had no idea. I didn't see it coming. And there wasn't any social media, which would have given away the gag too soon. So
only Charlton Heston can pull off that classic line of "Oh my God" in that raspy, deep voice, just "Oh my God," and then the pant.
You finally did it. He's like, "You finally did it, you bastards." I think he calls you bastards. and it's also like in Shyamalan did it in The Sixth Sense, where they're all like, so there are these moments in cinema or TV where you can pull off this great rug pulling out from under the audience, and I always wanted to do that. So this was kind of my entry into that sweepstakes of in Kepler, where we're the aliens. I think they've done it a couple times in The Twilight Zone, where to serve man, basically. Where the cookbook is people. These are kind of great kind of reveals, and I kind of wanted to enter into that.
Oh, it's a great book. I would love to see it get on the screen. I also love The Reservoir too, which is like a great unreliable narrator book that has you sort of like hanging on, like what is actually happening here. And I noticed you mentioned Jess Walter in the acknowledgments or something in here, who I think is amazing too. So you and Jess are buddies?
We are. Jess has been kind of in and out of Hollywood for years, writing screenplays. But we became friends the last maybe 5 or 6 years, and we've done a couple of book events together where he's interviewed me or I've interviewed him. And I agree with you. I think he's one of the great American novelists out there right now. And
is he any good at basketball?
He's really good.
Rumor has it he's pretty good. Nice.
He's
like,
really
can he
good.
hang with you?
Oh yeah.
When you played college you played college basketball. That's like another level.
Well, it was a long time ago. Jess only sees out of one eye, but he can shoot the three. I mean, he's legendary in my mind. We still talk about this because I went to do reshoots for a movie called The Joneses in Spokane, which is where Jess lives. 3 days in Spokane, and I just called and said, do you have a run? Do we have a game here? And he was like, yeah. So he brought me to this game on asphalt. It was fun. I mean, I was hurting afterwards for like a couple of weeks, just asphalt on your ankles. But he tells me that that game still to this day, if he goes to play it, they're like, hey, is Duchovny coming? Like it was just this weird thing that he showed up with me at this pickup game one time.
By the way, congratulations on saying Spokane, because I had Jess on the show, and I'm like, Spokane? And he's sort of, one of the benefits of being the same, I could sort of see the wince, and I'm like, and then the next time he very politely was, it's Spokane.
he's very polite.
Yeah, he's a great guy. You're a talented writer, and you've had this big life. Sometimes that's a recipe for a memoir. Is there any chance of that coming?
No.
Well, maybe that's better. Those books tend to work best with a little betrayal and score settling, and that doesn't exactly seem your style.
I don't mind a good score settling, especially if it's deserved. But I'm not into betrayal, especially I have not young, but I have children who could. They don't need to know.
They don't need to read all that. Yeah.
No,
I agree. Like, not everyone needs to put their personal life out on Instagram, and it's like you have these sweet, tender moments of like, oh, this is a great moment for Instagram. I don't understand that.
And it's also, I feel like I'm in a nice position because I know that I can kind of use my life or what's happened with me in my work. I can kind of transmute it into something else. I feel like memoirs are, obviously they're not the truth because they're one person's memory of the way things went down. But, I'm all for like turning it into art, and there's the lessons are there. The lessons are not, this happened, that happened, the other thing happened. This is what I learned.
That seems like a healthier way to go. I was noticing that Matthew Perry book had these, like, he kept making these mentions of Keanu Reeves. I didn't read it. I just saw the headlines about this, but it was just like, I don't know if you saw that, but it was such a random drive-by shooting of poor Keanu Reeves. I don't know why he was going after the guy.
Yeah, and that's, that could be score settling for him on some level that he's not revealing. But that's the thing is like, I don't really want to hurt people. And even just mentioning people is hurtful sometimes. Like I'm not into it, but like I said, score settling is certainly that's okay, but not it doesn't have to be a public score settling. A private score settling is just as satisfying.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like your relationship with Tay Leone is great. I did want to mention one thing. Every Christmas we watch The Family Guy. That has become one of our Christmas go-tos with Tay Leone and Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
It's an awesome movie.
Yeah, she's terrific. And that movie, it's kind of like a It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
It's kind of in that ballpark.
All right, so to the lightning round.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have one more. The Paloma has been doing me right, by the way. I've been enjoying this.
And you're getting your vitamin C, and I believe it lowers cholesterol. Grapefruit.
Oh, I should have 3 or 4 of these a day then.
I think you should.
Favorite book as a kid, 14 or younger?
I loved The Open Man by David Busher. It was his memoir of the
the New York Knicks basketball player.
Yeah.
Am I thinking of the right guy? Okay, I'll have to get that book. I like him. I went to college with his daughter.
I had a book. We used to order from the Scholastic. Remember, in school you would order from some magazine that had all these books in it, and I ordered a book called Winners Never Quit, which is it was inspiring sports stories. And, Mickey Mantle was in there because of how many knee operations he had. And what stuck out to me from that book, Willie Mays might have been in it too, but there was a race car driver. Oh, that's another. Here, there was a race car driver named, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but it's like Hurtubus, Hurtibuse, I think, Jim Hurtubus. And he had this terrible wreck where he was burned and his hands were going to be immobile, but he asked for the doctor to shape them so that they could clamp them on the wheel so that he could get back out there. So he's walking around with his hands like this for the rest of his life, but that's so he can put his hands on the wheel. And I've always thought that was a great choice, great heroism, and the passion of a guy who would do that. And that's kind of been my template.
That is amazing. Talk about getting back up on your horse. That's incredible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Book you're reading now?
Oh, I'm reading a book that was recommended to me. It's about an executioner in 16th century Germany. It's basically his diaries, because he did keep kind of a journal, at least of his work, and it's a historical recreation of what life was like then, but also for a job that was considered unclean. That executioners weren't really allowed to be part of regular society, and this one guy was kind of a striver and wanted to have his family business, which is what it was, become a business that was just as respected as other tradespeople. So it's a very interesting kind of a mindset and world from that time that I'd never really considered. You think about the mind of an executioner. Even to this day, it's a fascinating place to be.
Yeah, that's great. I've been on a history tear too. I'll have to. I'll get that recommendation from you.
Yeah.
Some folks have advanced copies of novels on their desks. You might have some screenplays that are being shopped around, like please star in my screenplay. But what's on your desk these days? Either advanced copy books or screenplays. Anything interesting?
Right. Well, it's been Kepler for a bit now, because I just got those advanced copies, it's fun for me because it's so different from anything I've done before, even to look at. And then what else is on that desk? I did find, because my mother passed away just recently, and I came into possession of, she was not a pack rat, but she certainly didn't throw a lot away. And she had my journals from when I was like 10 years old.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. So I've had those, and actually my girlfriend made me a mug with one of the quotes from the journal, which we laugh about, because at 10 years old, it's already so me, because it says, today was frustrating and tomorrow's not looking much better.
That's perfect for a mug. That's amazing. When you read this, can it conjure up the memory of the moments or even of writing it down? At 10,
No,
it's
but
like, I don't know if I can remember 10.
I can't believe how similar he is to me. I mean, he's he's very deadpan. He loves sports. I mean, I'm writing out my basketball averages to whatever decimal point they go to. You know, I'm just consumed with sports performance and disappointment.
I guess maybe we're all fairly baked by 10. I don't know. That's awesome. So what a gift to get that. That's so fun.
You know, I didn't just keep a journal. So it was an assignment of my Christmas vacation at that age. Yeah.
An assignment from your parents or from your teachers?
No, from school.
From school. Okay. A few recent TV shows that you would recommend to the listeners.
I love What We Do in the Shadows. I love that vampire show on FX. I have to say, I watched British Bake Off. I don't know why. I'm not interested in baking. I'm not interested in Britain, but I watched the British Bake Off.
Those shows are so relaxing. I've seen some of those.
They are. They're like mental. They're like Ambien. They're you know. I think I love that show so much because it's supposedly a competition, but they're so British to one another. They're just so nice to one another. They don't want anybody to lose, and it's just nice being in that world for half an hour where everybody wants the best for everyone, and they're just baking sweet stuff. You know,
they do seem a little more polite over there, except when you get in government. And you watch those parliament debates, and they're like, it's unbelievable how they go after each other.
I wish we would yell each other down like that instead of like the gentlewoman from wherever is right.
Yeah.
Yell her down.
All right. Best concert you've ever been to?
And this is not like the music was good, but it's just like the formative years. When I was 16, I saw Frampton Comes Alive, you know, the Peter Frampton.
Yeah.
And it was just like a happening for me then. You know, he was just so popular and I was just so into it. And Madison Square Garden. Yeah, I mean, when I was 14, I started going to concerts in Madison Square Garden. So I saw a lot of great stuff. I talked about this on Seth Meyers the other day. I was also a bartender at Radio City Music Hall where I saw great acts.
Tons of shows. Wow.
That band.
When were you doing that?
When? I was doing that right after college or like in between summers of college, maybe 20, 21, 22. So it was just a catering concession that had the bar there. And I saw
that's a great gig.
acts.
So your family was living Upper West and you just come down to Radio City for that?
No.
Or where were you born?
Side.
Lower East. Okay.
Side. Yeah, no, I didn't
Other
get
corner.
to the Upper West until later.
Okay. All right. So overrated or underrated? I'll name a couple music acts.
Okay.
And not a knock. This is just like not a knock on any band, just your personal taste relative to reception by the general public. AC/DC.
Underrated.
Underrated, meaning you like them. The Who.
I don't think you can rate them high enough. So I guess they're underrated. Yeah.
The Kinks.
Kinks are underrated too. You know, some of those riffs are so undeniable and smart lyrics. I think in many ways they didn't have a musical identity like the other bands did because they rocked hard, but they also did like a music hall, English, very musical kind of a thing. So I think critics didn't know what to make of them in a way. So I'd say underrated too. Yeah,
I love the Kinks. Whenever I'm on 80s on 8, you know, on the Sirius thing in the car all the time, when Kinks come on, there's so many good ones that
Lola
are underappreciated, I think.
Because Lola was about a drag queen, and that was a Planet of the Apes reveal in a song. It's like, oh my God, Lola's a guy.
It's a guy, right?
Because I was 10 years old. It's like I didn't know that happened. It was real education.
Taylor Swift.
Well, I don't really know her stuff so well, and I think she's a really good songwriter, but she'd have to be overrated because she's so popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's like she's almost nothing like her. I mean, even Madonna, she seems to be going beyond all that. Kid Rock.
Yeah. Kid Rock? Well, that first song was great. It was Ba Wada Ba, whatever it's called. That was a great song, and I love that. But I'd say he's both overrated and underrated. I think he's had a couple of really, really, this like the Sweet Home Alabama remix that he did. He's talented, but
I saw him live once, and he ran. It was one of the best. He's one of the best performers out there. He plays like 10 different instruments. He was buzzing around the stage.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe how much energy was going on up there.
I think that's what's the truth about him is he's a real musician. So I'd say he's underrated as a musician and probably overrated in terms of sales.
All right, appropriately rated. Maybe that's an option too. How about James Taylor?
I love Sweet Baby James. Come on, part of my childhood. Great voice, underrated guitar player, very simple, underrated guitar player. Great songwriter. Yeah, I think he's properly appreciated.
Okay, only two more. Justin Timberlake, the other JT.
The other JT. Well, that says it all, doesn't it?
Maybe I shouldn't say that. Actually, like there can be only one. It's like the Highlander.
I think, and again, this is a guy who I think is really talented. And some of those songs I'll listen to when they come on, but I'm not going to go home and put on a Justin Timberlake album to listen to. That's not really a knock on him, but I will acknowledge he's a super talented performer. He can dance, he can sing. He's a blue-eyed soul guy, and I love like Daryl Hall is another guy in that category. I think Daryl Hall is really underrated as a
It's an age thing. Like we come back, the music that made the biggest impression on me was my teens. I loved the Kinks and a lot of these other rock bands. Justin Timberlake, I just sort of I got here too soon for that, and I'm sure if you talk to some 25-year-old, they're like, who are the Kinks? I love James Timberlake. So.
Yeah. I mean,
last one, John McEnroe as a musician only.
He's got to.
Have you ever seen him play? Yeah, right. He hasn't even got a rating yet. He's got to work on that.
Does he have original music?
I feel like. Well, actually, that's a good question. I don't know. I know he's in a band and he plays and he's done gigs. I don't know if they've actually recorded an album.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a good musician. I think he's a good guitar player.
Have you seen him play?
Sure. I have, but it was before I played guitar, so I don't know. I went to Wimbledon like before I was well known. It was probably 1989. And I saw at the Hard Rock Cafe, McEnroe got up with Mats Wielander, and they kind of had a band. They kind of had a band together. They both played guitar, and it seemed like he could be up there, certainly. So he's probably a really good guitar player at this point. All
right, so let's go with underrated then.
Underrated.
Final question.
Nice to me when he sees me. I want him to say I'm an underrated tennis player. So.
All right, final question. One piece of good advice for the listeners, and it could be on anything, on writing, acting, life, East Coast versus West Coast.
I mean, I think it's what I tell my kids is, I never learned anything from success. I only learned from failure. So embrace that. Another thing that I'm trying to work with recently is, I was reading books about anxiety, depression, things like that. And we think of these uncomfortable states of being as things that we should medicate or eradicate, or, we have this vision of there's a life without anxiety and depression. And I think that I read this one guy or woman, I can't remember who said it, but said like, what if doubt is the air we breathe? What if it's just part of our makeup and environment and it's not something adversarial to be eradicated? And so I try and live in that moment when I'm feeling the doubt, which is the seed of any, artistic endeavor, is you're going to be doubtful it's going to work out. It's like, well, what if that's the air I breathe? It's not unnatural. That's my world. I'm going to just like live in it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's great. But that's great advice for any artist or even beyond.
Yeah.
David Duchovny, you are awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please download, rate, subscribe, write a comment. Let me know the authors you want to hear from. I read all the comments. Thank you.